You think you're thinking, but you're not. What you call thinking is just noise your brain makes to convince you that you're still in charge. It's a performance, a convincing one, but it's not you. It's something running on you, like software you never installed, code you never wrote, executing commands you never approved. And the strangest part? You defend it. You call it personality. You call it who you are. You say, "That's just how my mind works," like it's an unchangeable fact of nature, like the voice in your head is you instead of what it actually is. An algorithm trained by everything that ever hurt you, everything that ever scared you, everything you ever learned to avoid. Your mind isn't thinking. It's predicting. It's defending. It's rehearsing old scripts in an empty theater, hoping that if it plays them enough times, you'll finally be safe. But you're not in danger. You just feel like you are. Because the mind doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. It doesn't know the difference between now and then. It doesn't care. Its job isn't truth. Its job is survival. And survival doesn't require accuracy. It just requires noise. Constant, relentless, distracting noise. So it keeps you busy thinking about what you said 3 years ago. Rehearsing conversations that will never happen. Building arguments against people who aren't even in the room. Forecasting disasters that exist only in the space between your ears. And you sit there, nodding along, like this is normal. Like this is just what minds do. It is what minds do. But that doesn't mean you have to participate. Let's be clear about something. The voice in your head, the one narrating your life, commenting on everything you do, criticizing, analyzing, explaining, justifying, that's not you. That's the noise room. That's the mental broadcast you've mistaken for identity. You think it's helping you process. It's not. It's keeping you occupied. Because a mind that's busy doesn't have to face silence. And silence is where the real danger lives. Not danger to your life. Danger to your story. Danger to the version of yourself you've spent years constructing. The mind hates silence because silence reveals that you're not what you think you are. You're not your thoughts. You're not the narrator. You're not the story your brain keeps repeating to make sense of a life that doesn't need narration to exist. But admitting that feels like death. Not physical death. Ego death. The kind where the person you've been pretending to be gets exposed as a character. A role you've been playing so long you forgot it was a costume. And the mind will do anything to prevent that exposure. So it creates drama. It picks fights that don't exist. It remembers every slight, every rejection, every moment you felt small, and it plays them on repeat, like evidence. Evidence that you need to be careful. Evidence that the world is dangerous. Evidence that you can't relax. Because if you relax, you might notice that most of what you're afraid of isn't real. That most of what you're defending never needed defending. That the identity you're protecting so fiercely is just a habit of thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same feelings, reacting the same way, over and over and over until you confuse repetition with truth. But repetition isn't truth. It's just repetition, and your mind is very, very good at it. You ever notice how your mind loves imaginary arguments? How it can spend an hour constructing a fight with someone who isn't there, building their responses, preparing your rebuttals, getting genuinely angry at fictional dialogue. That's not processing. That's rehearsal. Your mind is practicing conflict because conflict keeps you engaged. It keeps the drama alive, and drama feels important. Drama feels like something is happening, but nothing is happening. You're sitting in a room, safe, probably comfortable, having a full-scale war with yourself while pretending it's about someone else. Because the mind doesn't want peace. Peace feels like vulnerability. Peace means lowering your guard. And if you lower your guard, all those old wounds might surface. All that unprocessed pain might demand attention. So the mind distracts you. It gives you something else to focus on, a problem to solve, a person to resent, a fear to analyze, and you go along with it, because at least it's familiar. At least you know how to do this. You've been doing it your whole life. Thinking about the past like you can change it, thinking about the future like you can control it. Never actually being here, never actually still. Because stillness is terrifying. Stillness means facing what you've been running from. And you've been running for so long, you've forgotten what you were running from in the first place. Now you're just running because the motion feels necessary. Like if you stop, something bad will happen. But nothing bad will happen. You'll just have to sit with yourself. And that's the thing the mind can't tolerate. Itself. Without distraction, without narration, without the constant hum of mental commentary. Just silence. And in that silence, you might realize you're not the thinker. You're the one watching the thinker. You're the one noticing the thoughts. You're the space where all this noise is happening. But the mind doesn't want you to know that. Because if you know that, it loses control. And control is the only thing it has. Here's what the mind does that you probably haven't noticed. It builds a case. Every day, every interaction, every small moment, your mind is collecting evidence. Evidence for a conclusion it already reached years ago. A conclusion about who you are, what you're worth, what you deserve, whether you're safe. And once that conclusion is set, the mind becomes a detective working backward. It doesn't look for truth. It looks for confirmation. It scans your environment, your relationships, your memories, searching for anything that proves the story it's already telling. You think you're being objective. You think you're just observing reality. But you're not observing reality. You're observing a filtered version of reality that confirms what you already believe. Your mind shows you what it wants you to see, and it hides the rest. This is why you can hear 10 compliments and 1 criticism. And the criticism is the only thing that stays with you. Because the criticism confirms the story. The compliments threaten it. And the mind can't let the story be threatened. The story is its job, its entire purpose, to keep you consistent, to keep you recognizable, to make sure that who you were yesterday matches who you are today, even if who you were yesterday was miserable. Because misery, when it's familiar, feels safer than change. Change means uncertainty. Uncertainty means loss of control, and the mind would rather keep you suffering in a predictable pattern than risk the chaos of something new. So it clings to old pain, to old identities, to stories that stopped being true years ago but still run your life because no one ever questioned them. And you let it, because you think those stories are you. They're not. They're just old code, loops that keep running because no one shut them down. Let me tell you what rumination actually is. It's not problem solving. It's not productive thinking. It's a control addiction. Your mind believes, genuinely believes, that if it thinks about something enough, it can prevent it. That if it replays the past enough times, it can find the moment where everything went wrong and fix it retroactively. That if it forecasts the future in enough detail, it can avoid disaster. But you can't fix the past. You can't control the future. And thinking about them obsessively doesn't change that. It just keeps you trapped in a mental prison you mistake for preparation. The mind calls it planning. It calls it being responsible. It calls it learning from your mistakes. But really, it's just fear, dressed up as productivity. Fear that if you stop thinking about it, something bad will happen. Fear that if you let go of the worry, you'll be caught off guard. Fear that the moment you relax, disaster will strike. So you stay vigilant. You stay anxious. You keep the mental hamster wheel spinning, because at least it feels like you're doing something. But you're not doing something. You're avoiding something. You're avoiding the present moment. Because the present moment doesn't need your thoughts. It doesn't need your analysis, or your commentary, or your constant narration. It just is. And that terrifies the mind. Because if the present moment doesn't need thinking, what's the mind's purpose? If everything is fine right now, what is there to fix? If there's no problem to solve, what is the mind supposed to do? So it creates problems. It finds things to worry about. It digs up old memories and projects future catastrophes and keeps you in a constant state of mental emergency. Not because there's an actual emergency, but because emergency is its natural state. The state where it feels most necessary, most important, most in control. And you've been living in that state for so long, you think it's normal. You think everyone's mind works like this. You think this is just what it means to be human. It's not. It's what it means to be controlled by a system that doesn't know the war is over. Your mind is like a security system that never got the memo that you're safe. It's still scanning for threats, still sounding alarms, still treating every minor inconvenience like a life or death situation. Because once upon a time, maybe it was. Once upon a time, you needed that vigilance. You needed to track every facial expression, every tone of voice, every subtle shift in mood, because your survival depended on it. But that time is over. The people who hurt you aren't here anymore. The situations that taught you to be afraid have ended. The environment that required constant alertness has changed. But the mind hasn't updated. It's still running the same program. The same threat detection software. The same emergency protocols. And it's exhausting you because you're not in danger. You're just convinced you are. And the conviction is so strong, so persistent, so automatic, that you never think to question it. You just obey. You obey the anxiety. You obey the rumination. You obey the voice that tells you to prepare for the worst, to protect yourself, to never fully trust, to never fully rest. And in obeying it, you give it power. You give it reality. You turn a mental pattern into a way of life. But here's the thing about patterns. They're not permanent. They're just repeated. And repetition feels like truth because it's familiar. But familiar isn't the same as necessary. It's just what you know. There's a reason your mind prefers drama over peace. Drama is engaging. Drama has stakes. Drama makes you feel like the protagonist of your own story, fighting battles, overcoming obstacles, surviving. Peace has none of that. Peace is quiet. Peace is still. Peace doesn't give you a role to play, or a mission to complete, or an identity to defend. Peace just is, and the mind finds that deeply threatening. Because if there's no battle, who are you? If there's no story, what defines you? If there's no problem to solve, what gives your existence meaning? So the mind manufactures problems. It creates conflict where there is none. It turns small inconveniences into major dramas. It finds something, anything, to keep you activated, keep you engaged, keep you identified with the thinker. Because the moment you're not identified with the thinker, the mind loses its grip. And losing its grip feels, to the mind, like annihilation. It's not, but it doesn't know that. So it fights. It resists. It generates more thoughts, more worries, more stories, more noise, hoping that the sheer volume will drown out the possibility of silence. And most of the time, it works. Most of the time, you're so caught up in the noise, you don't even realize it's optional. You don't realize you could just stop listening, not stop thinking. You can't stop thinking. Thoughts happen. That's what brains do. But you can stop treating every thought like it's important, like it's true, like it requires your immediate attention and response. You can let thoughts be what they are, just noise, automatic, meaningless, background static in a mind that's trying to keep itself relevant. But doing that, letting thoughts just be thoughts, requires something most people never develop: distance, the ability to watch your mind without becoming it, to notice the thoughts without believing them, to see the patterns without obeying them. And the mind will fight that distance with everything it has, because distance is the beginning of the end of its control, the end of its authority, the end of the story it's been telling about who you are and what you need and why you can't ever relax. can't ever relax. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what you think about yourself isn't even yours. It's inherited, absorbed, downloaded from parents, teachers, culture, trauma, rejection, comparison. You didn't choose your core beliefs. You were taught them. Or they were forced on you. Or they formed as defense mechanisms in moments when you had no other option. And now they run automatically, like an operating system you never consented to installing. You think you're making decisions. You think you're choosing how to respond, but you're not. You're just executing code. Code written years ago, in situations that no longer exist, by a version of you that was too young, or too hurt, or too scared to know any better. And that code is still running, still influencing every choice, every reaction, every belief about what's possible and what you deserve. You call it intuition. You call it gut feeling. You call it just knowing. But it's not knowing. It's conditioning. It's old patterns pretending to be wisdom. And the scary part, you can't see it, because the code doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, hey, this belief isn't yours, it's just something you learned when you were 7. It just feels like truth, like reality, like the way things are, and you live your entire life inside that framework, never realizing it's just a framework, just one possible interpretation, one lens you could remove if you knew it was there. But you don't know it's there, because it's invisible, because it is your perspective, your mind, your normal, until something breaks it, until something forces you to see that what you thought was reality was just a story, a convincing one, a persistent one, but still, just a story. And when that realization hits, it's destabilizing, because if that story isn't true, what is? If your thoughts aren't facts, what can you trust? If your mind isn't you, then who are you? The mind doesn't want you asking those questions, because it doesn't have good answers. So, it pulls you back into the familiar, back into the noise, back into the endless mental narration that makes you feel like someone who knows what's happening, even when you don't, especially when you don't. You know what's interesting? The mind is terrified of being wrong, but it's even more terrified of being irrelevant, because being wrong can be fixed. You can learn, you can adapt, you can change your mind. But being irrelevant, that's existential. That means all this thinking, all this analyzing, all this constant mental activity doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter, what is the mind even for? So it makes itself matter. It inserts itself into every moment, every experience, every emotion. You can't just feel sad. The mind has to explain why, has to trace it back to a cause, has to build a narrative, has to make sure you understand the sadness, contextualize it, compare it to other times you've been sad. You can't just be present. The mind has to comment on the present, has to judge it, has to decide if it's good or bad, safe or dangerous, worth staying in or escaping from. You can't just exist. The mind has to turn existence into a story, with plot points and meaning and lessons learned. Because without the story, you're just here. And here doesn't need narration. Here doesn't need interpretation. Here just is. But the mind can't tolerate that. So it narrates anyway. Interprets anyway. Keeps talking even when there's nothing to say. Because silence, real silence, mental silence, feels like erasure. Like if the mind stops talking, you'll disappear. But you won't disappear. The mind will. The noise will. The constant internal broadcast will. And what remains is just you. Not the story, not the identity, not the thoughts. Just awareness, just presence, just the quiet fact of being alive. And that's what the mind is really protecting you from. Not danger, not pain. It's protecting you from realizing you were never the mind to begin with. Let's talk about what happens when you stop feeding it, when you stop engaging with every thought, when you stop treating the mental commentary like it's important. At first, the mind panics. It escalates. It gets louder, more insistent. It throws everything at you. Old fears, worst-case scenarios, guilt, shame, regret, urgency. It's like a child throwing a tantrum because it's not getting attention. And it will throw that tantrum for as long as it takes to get you back. Because attention is obedience. Every time you engage with a thought, analyze it, argue with it, try to fix it, you're feeding the system. You're telling the mind that its noise matters, that it's in control. And the mind learns noise works. So it makes more noise. But if you don't engage, if you just let the thoughts come and go like clouds passing through sky, the mind gets confused. It doesn't know what to do with being ignored. It's used to being the center of attention, the narrator, the decision maker, the authority. And now it's just background noise, irrelevant noise. And that's when something strange starts to happen. The thoughts don't stop, but they lose their weight. They become less convincing, less urgent, less real, because without your attention, they have no power. They're just automatic firings of neurons, mental weather, passing phenomena, not truth, not identity, not commands you have to follow, just thoughts. And once you see them as just thoughts, everything changes. You realize you've been taking orders from a system that doesn't even know what it's doing. That's just reacting, just protecting, just repeating old scripts because that's all it knows how to do. And you don't have to obey anymore. You don't have to believe every fear. You don't have to engage every worry. You don't have to follow every mental spiral down into the dark. You can just let it happen. Let it run its program. Let it make its noise, while you remain still, watching, aware, not as the thinker, as the one who notices the thinking. And that noticing, that witnessing, is the only freedom you'll ever have. The mind will keep talking. It always does. It will narrate your life until your last breath. It will analyze, predict, defend, explain, justify. That's its function. That's what it's designed to do. But here's the question you've probably never asked. Do you have to listen? Do you have to treat every thought like it's true? Every fear like it's valid? Every story like it's who you are? Or can you let it be noise? Can you let the mind talk while you stay quiet? Can you let the thoughts come while you remain still? Most people never find out, because most people never question the voice. They assume it's them. They assume thinking is what they do, not what happens to them. But you're not your thoughts. You're not the voice. You're not the narrator or the story or the identity the mind keeps constructing. You're the silence beneath it all, the awareness, the presence, the space where thoughts appear and disappear. And the moment you realize that, really realize it, the mind loses its grip, not because you fought it, not because you fixed it, not because you transcended it, but because you stopped obeying. You stopped treating it like an authority, stopped giving it power, stopped believing that the noise was you. And in that stopping, you found something the mind can never give you: peace. Not the absence of thoughts, the absence of identification with them. Not the absence of noise, the ability to let noise be noise. Not the absence of mind, the realization that you were never the mind to begin with. The mind will keep talking. It always does. The only question is whether you keep obeying.